Hey, it's Simple Lines Anatomy. How's it going? In this video, we're going to be continuing on basically from our previous video where we were talking about the latissimus dorsi, the lats, and how it can essentially have a reverse pull. If you were to fix the arm, if we were to fixate the arm, stop it from moving, we made it so that it was completely stationary. And whether that's by fixing it by holding on to something or lifting a very heavy weight, it could have the reverse action of what you normally expect. So instead of the arm moving, into an internal rotation or an adduction, instead you would get quite a significant pull that could be exerted on not so much the arm, but instead the body. So something to this effect. Now, continuing that on, we have to explain that because this is normal and natural, we need some kind of counter pull or counterbalance. That's the theme for this particular video. And this means that these two structures move together. That's how we like to say it. So when we're talking about that, we're talking about the arm and the low back pelvis should move together and should calibrate to one another because they are linked by many tissues, and the lats are just a good example of that. So let's say the lats are contracting. Let's say the arm is fixated somehow or being pulled on. Either or is fine. And now it is pulling on that lumbar spine pelvis area. So it's pulling in this general direction because it attaches through here, low thorax, lumbar spine, sacrum, pelvis. If it's pulling it that way, it will start to, or to have the capacity to, unlevel the pelvis. So where normally the pelvis could be here, let's say, it could start to lift the pelvis up this way. And as well, we'd probably start to see a side bending into the lumbar spine. It'd be lumbar spine, more so thorax, so it'd be low thorax, 7 to 12 area, and then L4, L5 for sure. But we definitely see a side bending. So if we allowed that to happen completely unopposed, if we allowed that to happen in an isolated way, it's simply impossible. It would never happen. But if we allowed that to happen, you would probably fall over. So we need something to counterbalance that. So when that's the case, what we have to do is we look for similarly oriented fibers on the opposite side, just to make it clear. We look for fibers that can counter this, and it's very easy to do because if the lats are generally going this way, we find something going in the same direction, and we have an idea what's going to mechanically counterbalance. So a good example is the quadratus lumborum muscle. QL for short, attaches from the 12th rib. Make that straight. There we go. There we go. Okay. 12th rib, like so. And definitely about as low as transverse process of L4 into the ilium. Let me clean this up a little bit there. There we go. There we go. Okay. And so that being the case, if the pelvis is going unlevel, if it's being lifted up on the one side like so, that QL is capable of contracting and lifting that other side up and neutralizing the effects of an isolated pull like the latissimus dorsi. So it's very much capable of doing that. Again, otherwise we would topple over if we simply allowed ourselves to be lifted up only on one side. Okay, we also have a few more options. So let's say we have, again, this pull of the lats going up, give or take this way. We have a few different muscles that are very important to keeping the spine straight. The erectors, such as iliocostalis, and then longissimus, like so, and then we could also mention spinalis, going roughly in these directions. They overlap quite a bit. I'm just going to keep it relatively simple here. And so when the lats are pulling that pelvis up, if they're taking the sacrum out of place, when they're basically doing this, we're drifting the one side up, it can counteract that by pulling on the spine or pulling on the pelvis, doing very much the same as a QL, and making sure that it stays relatively level. And so this should be instinctive. This should be built into the system, essentially hardwired. When something wants to go unlevel, something else should contract to make certain that it stays relatively level. Counter force, if you will. And this is very much wired in through the extrapyramidal tracts and the involuntary motor neurons of the spinal cord. Okay, one more example. We can kind of take ourselves around. So the fibers of the QL will actually start to blend with the fibers of the abdominal tissues. We're going to be covering those later, but they go all the way around this way. So I'm going to switch to this view. So looking at the oblique fibers, we're looking at transverse view, by the way. The oblique fibers, whether that's external oblique or internal oblique, which would be normally not superficial, but it's deeper structure. It also is oriented in that same direction, because if the lats, they would be on the other side, of course. If the lats are essentially running this way, they can also counter the force of those tissues. The abdominal can counter the ascending forces, the pulling up forces of the latissimus dorsi, and we can balance that out, understanding that the lats want to pull up, and that would be unilateral, so the lats are pulling up on this side, and the abdominal tissues are also able to pull up on this side to counterbalance that. So it goes fair way around. These are postural muscles in many ways, these abdominal muscles. It doesn't seem like it. It seems like they're vanity muscles in a lot of ways, but the abdominal tissues have a big effect on how the whole body stays upright. So one last thing we want to mention. Now, we were talking basically under the context of a pull that would be exerted for a period of time, a pull that would be exerted for maybe a sudden duration, or we were lifting something heavy, pulling something down more realistically. But let's think about something. Let's talk about as if the shoulder instead, and we're talking clavicle and scapula, went into protraction and abduction. So it was taken away from the midline. This would lengthen the distance between here and here, and it wouldn't be up like this all the time. The shoulder could still be in a relative neutral position. So the shoulder, would be somewhere around here, like that, and in neutral. But the lats could still be lengthened, even though we appear normal. Now, this is not a big deal over time, or a short period of time, but after decades, as we get increased tone in the area, increased stretch, because every time we take a step or every time we do an arm swing in moving, every time we reach for something, we're hyperextending those lats just a little bit. The body will start to react to that. So the position of this shoulder, which is now being shifted, so we'll take it and we'll shift it a little bit forward, and we'll lengthen that distance here again. We can see that it would start to make the body believe itself to be in a state of lengthening that isn't actually there, or it's certainly not necessary. So you can see how the body would start to react. It believes this to be true, so it starts contracting the QL unnecessarily. Maybe it starts to contract the erector spinae unnecessarily. Maybe it starts to contract the abdominal muscles unnecessarily. And this is a big deal, because consider what would happen if this were the case. You would start to lose mobility through this region here. You would stop moving here based on the increased tone in the air, the compensatory tone that has no need to be there. And suddenly, maybe you're having back pain. Maybe your hip is no longer tracking right because your sacroiliac joint is no longer moving. Maybe your whole pelvis mobility decreases and you start straining your knees. But it may never have had anything to do with the fact that your low back is a problem. We love to blame the low back for feeling pain. We love to blame anything that's feeling pain for being the cause of something. But it could very well have started all the way up in that shoulder, all the way up in the clavicle and the scapula. And until that's really fixed, we can't really expect to see any permanent resolution of our other problems related to it. Hope that made sense. This has been Simple Lines Anatomy. See our stuff, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. We've got an app. This is just terrible. Don't even check that out. Don't waste your time.